A very good evening and welcome to Biz First in Focus. Sri Lanka currently have found themselves in the middle of a sticky geopolitical situation here in the Indian Ocean. And to discuss matters regarding this, we've got in our studios today with us Dr. Harindra Vidanage. He's a director at the Bandaranaike Center for International Studies. A very good evening, Dr. Harindra.
Good evening, Shahan.
First things first, Doctor. What is this geopolitical crisis that we are facing here in the Indian Ocean?
Well, rather than a crisis, it's a result of a competition that we are witnessing in the last 5 to 10 years. Of course, the Indian Ocean has always been geopolitically contentious, but what's happening in the recent past is that there is a culmination of world powers who are kind of congregating in our ocean system. It's because of many reasons, but I'll outline few of the more important ones. One, globally, since the turn of the 21st century, we are seeing a significant recession of American power from the world as well as the region. So that doesn't, I'm not saying the US is in decline. I'm saying is that US is folding back to a certain extent. Of course, there are certain reasons why the US is doing it, and this is accelerated by the current US administration since 2016. The current president has made it clear that he has little interest in being involved in many global affairs.
America first policy.
Yes, America first, and looking at America from more inwards. That's one. At the same time, what we are seeing is a coming to power of a very important pivotal Chinese president in the form of President Xi Jinping. President Xi Jinping is the first Chinese president in the modern China since Chinese evolution, who has made it very clear to show China's intentions to the world. So China is very clear about what it wants in the global stage. That is the biggest difference between him and the charismatic and the more transformative Deng Xiaoping, whom we all look at as the father of modern Chinese rise. But Deng Xiaoping always had this mantra, higher, bide our strength, and wait for it. Hide our strength and bide our time, right? And let's not show the world that we have emerged. But doing a complete U-turn, President Xi Jinping, since his ascent to power in 2013, he made it clear it's time for China to announce to the world that it's a global player, and it has not just regional but global intentions of announcing its newfound power. So I'm not trying to say China is challenging, but analysts argue what China currently does falls under the term counter-hegemonic, which basically means it's challenging the existing hegemon, but in a more sophisticated, discrete way. So what it's doing at the moment is it's expanding. It's basically it has announced the One Belt One Road policy, which is a major strategic political policy of reaching out to the world via a maritime linkage as well as a land connectivity. So China is building significant number of ports across Asia into Africa, and also going up to Europe, the Piraeus port in Greece. And at the same time, China is building land routes, land connectivities to all over the parts of Central, West, and even parts of Europe. So what China is doing has created a major concern among the traditional players who we call belong to part of the geopolitical West, which was led by the United States, right? So the US, Europe, Japan, Australia, and to a certain extent India, they are all worried about China's increasing potential of being a regional plus a global power. So what you are seeing in the Indian Ocean is a play out, is a play out between the rising China as well as the other traditional powers trying to contain it in ways that's possible for them. So what it's creating a unique challenge, as well as I see always an opportunity for Sri Lanka, because we are right in the middle of this storm. We are right in the middle of an increasingly intensifying geopolitical competition.
What is the key strategic point that Sri Lanka has in the whole China's One Belt One Road initiative?
Well, China has put Sri Lanka as a key pivot state in their One Belt One Road policy. So if you read Chinese strategic doctrine, China's academics and policymakers writing about Sri Lanka, they call Sri Lanka a pivot state.
Okay.
So they call Sri Lanka a pivot state because they see Sri Lanka as a pivot for them to connect the One Belt. So it's a very important strategic location, and Sri Lanka has always been a important strategic location for rest of the world, for India, for the United States for a long time. So in that process, we are seeing what we call the emergence of geopolitics, geopolitical rivalry. I must tell you, Shalan, geopolitics was not a favorable word even among the West. The West didn't like it because geopolitics is a concept that emerged in the Second World War, which they say was the main driver of Hitler's Nazism. Hitler's foreign policy, Hitler's military policy was shaped by the idea of geopolitics. So the Americans didn't like it. But what geopolitics does is it provides countries with a view, a picture about the world, about the region, and that picture provides them a kind of impetus to shape their policies to match that picture. So for example, now everybody is looking at Sri Lanka from that picture. So Sri Lanka, if you look at take a snapshot of the ocean, sits right in middle of the Indian Ocean, which is connecting a lot of energy routes, merchant trade routes, petroleum trade routes, and of course the Indian and Pacific Oceans together has about 10 of the world's most busiest ports. So what I'm trying to say here is geopolitics is not the only way of looking at relations in the region, but it's now the definitive feature. It has become the definitive feature in policymakers' mindsets all over the region. We could have looked at the region in a very different way. The moment we look at the region from a geopolitical perspective, all our foreign policies, national security policies have been framed in that narrative.
Okay, okay. So we are in discussion with Dr. Harindra Vidanake regarding the current geopolitical status that is present here in the Indian Ocean region. We cross over to a short commercial break. Don't go anywhere. You're watching Biz First in Focus. Welcome back to Biz First in Focus. If you're joining us just now, we are in discussion with Dr. Harindra Vidanake, Director at the Bandaranaike Center for International Studies, regarding the current geopolitical situation in the Indian Ocean region and how this affects Sri Lanka. Doctor, now to my second main question. Now, we have identified the issue, what is the geopolitical status here in the Indian Ocean region? Second issue, how does this impact Sri Lanka?
Well, it impacts Sri Lanka in a multiple ways, because Sri Lanka at the moment, if you look at Sri Lanka at the moment, we are as I said earlier, we are lying in middle of the whole competition, but we are also there, which means all these countries will have an interest in how they interact with Sri Lanka and how they further their interests using us, right? So mainly our geographic location, as well as our with the location, with our facilities, such as the main thing is the ports. So when they look at Sri Lanka from that perspective, our biggest challenge is how do we mitigate their interests and try to advance our own interests and also make something which is progressive for us.
Something mutually beneficial.
Maybe mutually beneficial. Mutually beneficial is a bit of a ideological ideal situation, but at least something which will benefit us as well. Yes, it's great if we can. It's ideal if we can have a mutual benefit, but at least some kind of benefit for us. Being a small power in a trapped between in middle of a big power rivalry, it's a challenge, but that's what we should be doing, because we should always understand everything that happens, every overture that comes from India, China, Japan, the US is coming in their own interests. So our challenge is how do we transform, not overcome it, how do we transform,
how do we utilize it
to our interests as well. So that's a big challenge. That's the biggest challenge we have.
So, like you said before, Doctor, China seems to be stamping their mark in the global arena through the Belt and Road Initiative, especially. There is an indication that India, Japan, the US, and Australia are kind of coming into an informal agreement to counter China's influence in the Indian Ocean region. What is the truth to this?
As I told you earlier, they all belong to a certain extent, not India, but Japan and Australia strongly, and the United States, they feel that they belong to the geopolitical West, which was the dominative force in shaping global politics ever since the end of the Second World War. So, from their perspective, they are losing that ability.
They are hold of the world.
Hold of the world. But at the same time, when I say hold of the world, they didn't hold the world through power. They held the world through institutions, through values, norms, systems. So what we call the liberal values, what we call the global free trading system, right? And when it comes to politics, the liberal democratic political systems. So what they are worried is, will all those structures and value systems, institutions they built, are they going to be vulnerable when another power which does not represent the same worldview, which does not represent the same political values, comes out of age in a certain way and is influencing politics and economics of other countries in that region? So they are actually, for Japan and Australia, they are actually fighting for the heart and soul of liberalism in a certain way in the Indian Ocean. So they must be feeling, I mean, and for the US, what they worry is, what people don't understand is, the US built this system, whether you like it or not, since the Second World War. They were the hegemonic power which made sure free trade could happen, security was granted. But when they feel that they are no longer capable of doing it, that is also a problem. So what China is doing is actually, in a way, disrupting
the entire world balance,
the world order that the US and the allies built after the Second World War.
We can see, as a response to this whole situation, there is a trade war brewing between the US and China as well. How has this affected Sri Lanka?
To be very honest, I don't have facts and figures to look at the impact of Sri Lanka, but the trade war, I think, is impacting both China and the US negatively. There is a lot of push even from China. I think what I latest I heard is that a lot of Chinese bureaucrats, policymakers are urging Xi Jinping also to calm down, as well as American Republicans, Democrats alike are telling Trump, to calm down, because for the last 18 months what they were having was this intensification of the trade war. And the Chinese, I remember even a couple of years back, seeing this coming, even promised, I mean, they pledged to the US that they will buy more oil from them, more gas from them. What people don't know is there are a lot of trade happening between the US and China as well. So despite the trade war, so what analysts fear is it will create certain global uncertainties, as well as if markets will have a bigger fall, depending on what you sell, what you buy. But at the moment, Sri Lanka is not kind of directly affected, but when the currencies are affected. If you have a stronger dollar, for example, some people argue the trade war will strengthen the dollar. So that will have a great impact on us. Already the Sri Lankan rupee is under huge stress when you convert into a dollar rate. So last thing you want is a strong dollar, right? And that's the last thing the American traders also want. But the trade war, they say, can strengthen the dollar as well.
So back to this whole issue of the geopolitical situation in the Indian Ocean region. Is Sri Lanka's response to this whole situation that has arisen in the Indian Ocean region with global powers and emerging powers competing with each other, has Sri Lanka's response been adequate? Has it been properly planned?
No, I think Sri Lanka, this is where we are seriously in a bit of a fix, because if you look at the last 5 to 6 years, our foreign policies have shifted significantly. So when we had the previous administration, we saw a significant eastward drift. Clearly the administration was very much reliant on Chinese support, and there was a reason. The practical reason was China was the only country which was there to back us, and to provide us not just the money but the weapons to win a war. So some American analysts say China won Sri Lanka's war for us. And of course, in that situation, we were in a way obliged to work more with China. But then when the current administration came into power in 2015, there was a belief we should do a significant. We believe that the liberal world was our, in a way, our savior. Our progress was in that. So we had a bit of a switch, what we call the pendulum swung again back to the West. But then in a few years, a year and a half into this government, they realized, the West was not delivering what they pledged. And the West, the sad reality is the reality of the world. The West is no longer having deeper pockets. They are no longer able to support certain initiatives that Sri Lanka does. So Sri Lanka realized we have to have a foreign policy, a nuanced one, which can engage with the West. And
can accommodate the West and the East.
And especially, we cannot forget India. We should never, the carnal mistake Sri Lankan politicians can do is forget India. India can never be forgotten, because it is the geopolitical fatalism that, as we call it, is there. It's right there. So we can never forget India. So India is a key plank in our foreign policy, but we can never pretend that China is not rising. So so the foreign policy should be a policy of pragmatism, which can accommodate all these players in. So, but the thing is, the biggest problem for us is when we have a government which is a grand coalition, which is then not able to have a clear policy direction. For example, our foreign policy may be a little different from our economic policy. So we sometimes now tend to believe in free trade agreements, which I'm not criticizing, but we are trying to find short-term fixers
for long-term problems.
Because the problem is, since we can't get a coherent voice within the government to look at a strategic future of Sri Lanka, that is where it's hampering Sri Lanka's foreign policy making.
So we're in discussion with Dr. Harindra Vidanage regarding the current geopolitical situation in the Indian Ocean region and Sri Lanka's response to it. We cross over to a short commercial break. Don't go anywhere. You're watching Biz First in Focus. Welcome back. You're watching Biz First in Focus. If you're joining us just now, we're in discussion with Dr. Harindra Vidanage, Director at the Bandaranaike Center for International Studies, regarding the geopolitical situation that is present here in the Indian Ocean, Sri Lanka's response to it. Before the break, we were discussing how Sri Lanka's response to this situation is like. I would now like to ask Dr. Harindra Vidanage, what do you think Sri Lanka should do? What is the ideal response? What are the options that Sri Lanka have to manage this geopolitical situation and face it successfully?
Yeah, so I think Sri Lanka has to be extremely pragmatic and realistic about our own situation. This is something, a narrative I have always been bringing out, even in my writing, which I argue that there is this notion that we can balance. We can balance between China and India. We can, it's all about a balancing act. The term seems very right, but my argument is, if you are from China, if you're from India, you think you will get caught to this balancing act of Sri Lanka. So neither China or Sri Lanka, India is stupid to think that we are not an intellectually super race, beyond the
compared to the other countries.
Compared to other countries, and with 1.5 billion, 1.3 billion people, those two countries have extremely smart and intelligent people. So my pragmatic thing, number one, is we have to accept the fact that we have gone beyond the point of balancing. We are actually in a managing situation. What we have to do, Sri Lanka's foreign policy has to do to continuously manage the rivalry, because it's going to intensify and it's going to have more players coming in. Now, earlier we were talking about the Sino-Indian balancing, but now we have Australia. Now you can very clearly see with the two very high-level delegations, the two ministers from Japan that came to Sri Lanka, it's very clear Japan,
Defense Minister and the State Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Japan has a major interest, because Japan is partnering a lot with India these days, and they are involved in a lot of military, when I say military communications and civilian highway development projects. So India and actually India's major partner in countering China, if I may say very candidly, is not America, it's Japan. Yeah, the Indians and the US may still have certain differences. Of course, they have signed certain military agreements. There are servicing agreements that they have signed recently. But I think the Indian administration is still very comfortable in dealing with Japan. And Japan and India has created a very interesting bond that is understudied in Sri Lanka about how they counter other players in the region. So we have to be extremely sensitive to these factors. If not, we would have. It's a mess. I mean, for me also, it's amazing to see these two visits, right? And they're not. And the visits don't come alone. They come with their military hardware is also here.
Their
right?
ships are here.
Their ships are here. So it's a show of significant interest, strategic interest by Japan. Right, that means Sri Lanka may have in the future deal with Japan dealing with Japan is not easy. Dealing with Japan would be very, very challenging. So we have to deal with countries, the US, Japan, China, Australia. Australia
India.
has India. So maybe in the future Indonesia. So what we are seeing, Singapore and of course so Sri Lanka's foreign. That's why I'm always saying there is no real fix, but I think we have to. This is a time where extreme pragmatism is needed in our foreign policy making, and it is a time that we actually should consolidate and try to balance our internal domestic political machinery. If not, my fear is the more political instability we go into, more geopolitical interests will be driving those politics of Sri Lanka. The last thing Sri Lanka needs is geopolitics entangled with domestic politics and creating a political architecture that is totally foreign to us, but Sri Lankans will think it's a local to us. So
basically local politicians relying on these international superpowers to fuel their campaigns.
Yeah, not just relying. I think when such an intense geopolitical rivalry is heating up, I think the geopolitical the rival countries will also have.
They will reach out.
Yeah, they're obvious. That's what.
Do you think that has already begun?
Of course, I think that has already begun, and that has been a way of what we call statecraft even during the Cold War. Every time, if you look at the whole study of the Cold War, that is the trademark of the Cold War, statecraft. So that statecraft is very clear.
So none of these situations ended up with a happy ending for any of the countries involved in it.
Yeah, I mean, unless you can, that's what I'm saying. That's why my as an international relations analyst and a scholar, my major worry is how Sri Lanka is not about the international, the domestic situation. The more we succumb to our own political the political frictions, we are in extremely, we are reaching a point of a serious national security crisis that we have not seen before. That's my major worry.
Dr. Haridh Vidadage, real short, finally, what are the key options that Sri Lanka has left? What do you think our way forward should be?
No, I think our way forward is very clear. We have to accept this is real, this is happening. This is happening. So we have to create our relations have to be done with the states with that mindset. We have to be very welcoming. We have to be accommodative. We can never say no to China, no to India, no to the US. Sri Lanka can never do that. So we have to accommodate that. So, but we should try to see, for example, in the context of businesses, investments, to see strike a balance. I'm not saying give Hambantota to China and give Matala to India. That's not striking a balance. Okay. That's a kind of it's avoiding a crisis, catastrophe. I'm not trying to say is how we can, for example, develop. We don't regional development. Japan can develop some of our regions. China can develop some of our regions in partnership with Sri Lankan regions. So India has been helping us developing the rail network. So those things should continue. The more players we have on the ground involved in our development and economics is better than players trying to influence our politics.
From the outside.
From the outside and also even from the inside. But if they feel we are accommodating them to a certain extent through economic developments, social, cultural, political engagements, universities, we have a serious crisis of education. If you look at what Nehru did during the Cold War, even the best how did India become such IT superpower? Because they built 9 IITs, the tech institutes in India. But Nehru got America to build one, the Russians to build one, the Germans to build one for India.
So he amassed all of that knowledge.
Yeah, even at that time. So we have.
He played it smart.
Yeah. So we need to have that kind of investment. We seriously need a multilateral investment coming from all these countries. We should welcome it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harindra Vidanage. We were in discussion with the director of the Bandaranaike Center for International Studies on the current geopolitical situation here in the Indian Ocean and Sri Lanka's response for it. Thank you very much for watching Biz First Review 360. Thank you very much, Dr. Harindra Vidanage, for joining us
Thank you for
this evening.
Right.
And until next time, take care and God bless.